The thing most people are getting completely backwards about fasted morning exercise isn't whether it burns more fat. It's what it's doing to your stress hormones while you do it. There is a version of this that quietly heals your body from the inside out, and there is a version that is slowly grinding your adrenal glands down to dust. The terrifying part is they look exactly the same from the outside. You wake up, you skip breakfast, you walk for 30 minutes, you feel kind of good after. But what is actually happening inside your hypothalamus, inside your adrenal cortex, inside every cell that runs on fuel you haven't eaten yet, that story is completely different. It depends on
The
a few
cortisol
variables
conversation.
that nobody in the fitness
Morning
world is
biology
talking
for
about.
medical school.
What you're
And
about
here's
to
the
hear
brain.
isn't the standard fasted cardio debate. This is the cortisol conversation that should have been happening all along. And by the end of it, you will understand your own morning biology better than most people who spent years in medical school. Here is the problem that nobody frames correctly. Your body does not experience fasting and exercise as two separate events. It experiences them as a single compounded stressor. The organ managing that stress response is your hypothalamus, the pea-sized command center sitting at the base of your brain that is constantly asking one question: is this safe or is this a threat? When you haven't eaten since the night before and you start moving your body, your blood glucose is already trending lower than it was at midnight. Your liver has been quietly releasing stored glycogen through a process called glycogenolysis all night to keep your brain fueled, and by morning that reservoir is partially depleted. Now you add movement. Your muscles start demanding glucose and free fatty acids. Your hypothalamus reads this energy demand signal like a fire alarm. It triggers the HPA axis, hypothalamic pituitary adrenal, which is essentially your body's emergency broadcast system. The pituitary gland releases adrenocorticotropic hormone. A CTH travels through your bloodstream to your adrenal glands sitting on top of your kidneys, and those adrenal glands respond by pumping out cortisol. Think of cortisol like the emergency generator in a building during a power outage. The grid went down, you haven't eaten, so the backup system kicks in to keep the lights on. A 2023 paper published in the Journal of Clinical Endocrinology and Metabolism confirmed that fasted exercise at any intensity elevates cortisol above fed-state exercise by a statistically significant margin. The question that study didn't answer, and the question most videos never touch, is whether that elevation is the generator saving the building or the generator overheating and burning the whole thing down. That distinction lives in two variables: intensity and time of day. And this is where the biology gets genuinely wild. Your cortisol is not a flat line. It follows what researchers call the cortisol awakening response, or CAR, a natural surge that peaks roughly 30 to 45 minutes after you open your eyes. This surge is not pathological. It is your body's biological alarm clock, mediated by the suprachiasmatic nucleus in your hypothalamus, responding to light input from your retinas. A 2022 study in psychoneuroendocrinology found that this morning cortisol spike can be up to 75% higher than your baseline afternoon cortisol. And it serves a critical function. It mobilizes glucose, primes your immune system, sharpens prefrontal cortex activation, and literally wakes up your metabolism. Here is the part that most people completely miss. Low-intensity fasted walking, performed during this cortisol awakening response window, does not create a second cortisol spike. It rides the existing wave. When you walk at a pace where you can still hold a conversation, roughly 50 to 60% of your maximum heart rate, norepinephrine release from your sympathetic nervous system is sufficient to drive fat oxidation without triggering a full adrenocortical stress response. Your body shifts into what metabolic researchers call a fat-oxidizing steady state. Free fatty acids are cleaved from visceral adipose tissue through hormone-sensitive lipase activation, a process directly suppressed by insulin, which is at its lowest possible level because you haven't eaten. This is the metabolic sweet spot. Cortisol assists lipolysis in this state rather than dominating it. And it gets even wilder than that. Research from the University of Bath, published in Cell Metabolism in 2021, demonstrated that low-intensity fasted exercise upregulates a gene expression profile associated with improved insulin sensitivity in skeletal muscle tissue, specifically through AMPK activation, the enzyme that acts like a cellular fuel gauge. When AMPK is switched on, your muscle cells become more efficient at glucose uptake, independent of insulin. This means that a 30-minute fasted walk, done correctly, is not just burning fat in the moment, it is literally reprogramming your muscle cells to be less insulin-resistant over time. The cortisol that rises during this walk is not the villain. It is the catalyst that unlocks the cascade. But push the intensity past that threshold. Start jogging, start incline intervals, start anything that takes you above 65% of your max heart rate in a fasted state, and the mechanism inverts completely. High-intensity fasted exercise triggers a disproportionate ACTH response from the pituitary because your muscles are now outpacing your liver's ability to release glycogen fast enough. Your blood glucose starts dropping faster than gluconeogenesis can compensate. The hypothalamus reads this as a genuine metabolic emergency, not a manageable fuel shift. It hammers the adrenal glands for a second wave of cortisol. Now you have the morning car cortisol plus the exercise stress cortisol stacked on top of each other. Chronic exposure to this double cortisol pattern drives something researchers call HPA axis dysregulation. Your adrenal glands become either hyper-responsive, keeping cortisol elevated for hours after exercise, or eventually blunted, unable to produce an adequate cortisol awakening response at all. A study in sports medicine from 2022 found that athletes performing high-intensity fasted training 5 or more times per week showed measurably lower morning cortisol output after 12 weeks, which sounds good until you understand that low CAR is associated with chronic fatigue, impaired immune function, reduced cognitive performance, and disrupted circadian rhythm. Your adrenal glands were not designed for daily emergencies. And there is a second villain that nobody names in this conversation, ghrelin. Your hunger hormone peaks in a fasted state, and it directly amplifies cortisol receptor sensitivity in the brain, meaning the same amount of cortisol hits harder when you haven't eaten. This is why high-intensity fasted training can feel oddly anxious, irritable, or mentally foggy, even in people who consider themselves fit. It isn't weakness. It is your hypothalamus responding to a genuine biochemical mismatch. Here is the deeper truth underneath all of this. The supplement and fitness industry has spent 20 years monetizing fasted training as a fat loss hack. And in doing so, they buried the nuance that would have made it safe and effective for the actual humans trying to do it. They needed you anxious about your body composition, so you would buy the thermogenic pre-workout and the BCAA powder and the cortisol-blocking adaptogen stack, all products that address the side effects of doing the very thing they told you to do. Meanwhile, your ancestors never had a separate fasted cardio protocol. They woke up, they moved to gather water or food or tend to animals. They did so at low to moderate intensity because high-intensity exertion in a fasted state on a regular basis would have been biologically catastrophic. In an environment with unpredictable food access, your DNA is literally written for slow, purposeful, fasted movement in the morning. The circadian biology of your HPA axis, the fat oxidation pathways of your adipose tissue, the AMPK upregulation in your skeletal muscle, all of it evolved to work in concert with this exact pattern. The modern fitness world didn't discover fasted training. It rediscovered half of it and then immediately sold you the complicated version because the simple version doesn't have a product attached. So here is exactly what the research supports and what you can start doing tomorrow morning. Walk for 25 to 30 minutes within 60 to 90 minutes of waking before eating anything. Keep your pace conversational. You should be able to speak in full sentences without gasping. If you are using a heart rate monitor, stay between 50 and 65% of your maximum heart rate, which you can estimate as 220 minus your age. Do this 4 to 5 times per week, not 7. Your HPA axis needs recovery days, just like your muscles do. If you have a history of adrenal fatigue, chronic stress, or sleep disruption, start with 20 minutes and build slowly. Pushing intensity before your cortisol rhythm is stable will make things worse before they get better. Drink water before you go. Even mild dehydration raises cortisol by activating vasopressin release from the posterior pituitary. No coffee before the walk if you can manage it. Caffeine extends the cortisol awakening response and stacks a third cortisol signal on the 2 you already have. If you must have coffee, wait until after the walk. Eat within 30 to 45 minutes of finishing. A meal with protein and carbohydrates will suppress cortisol and replenish liver glycogen, and signal to your hypothalamus that the fast is over and the emergency is resolved. That post-walk meal is not optional if you want this protocol to build you up, rather than slowly erode you. Now here is the challenge. Try this exact protocol, low intensity, conversational pace, fasted morning, 4 days this week, and pay attention to 3 things. How your energy feels in the 2 hours after the walk compared to non-walking mornings. How your hunger is different at lunch, and whether your afternoon mental sharpness changes. These are the real biomarkers, not the scale, not the mirror, the internal signal quality. Most people who do this correctly report that the afternoon cortisol flatline, that 2 to 3 p.m. crash that feels like your brain is running on dial-up, starts to smooth out within the first week. That is not a coincidence. That is your HPA axis recalibrating, your adrenal glands no longer burning through their reserves by 9 a.m. because you stopped asking them to fight a two-front war every single morning. Your circadian cortisol curve, steep rise, gradual fall, is one of the most powerful determinants of how you feel, how you think, and how your body ages at a cellular level. Disrupting it chronically has been linked in multiple longitudinal studies to accelerated telomere shortening, increased visceral adipose tissue accumulation, and elevated systemic inflammation markers like CRP and IL-6. Protecting it costs nothing. It just costs attention. Drop a comment below telling me what you noticed after 7 days, specifically whether your energy curve changed, because the pattern that shows up in the comments is going to be one of the most useful pieces of real-world data on this topic anywhere online. Next time, we are going inside what happens when you extend that fast past the walk. What eating your first meal 2 hours after fasted walking versus immediately after actually does to your insulin response and your growth hormone secretion. That one is going to completely change how you think about your post-workout window. For now, remember this: your cortisol is not your enemy. It is a signal. Learn to work with the rhythm it is already running. Protect the morning window it depends on, and stop mistaking intensity for effort. Your body will do the rest. It has been waiting for you to stop fighting it.